and it's called, very appropriately called, Pluto and his Venus. Size doesn't matter. It had been a long year for Pluto. As he rolls out of bed in the morning, even this is painfully brutal. He looks at the mirror, and he cannot believe he is used to the mess on his head that he once knew to be this perfectly pruned updo. You see, Pluto inspects his reflection intently, and he sees something about himself that's unpleasantly empty. He sees something about his expression that draws his attention to obsession over imperfection. And so Pluto feels cold inside. As he walks in circles in his dark single bedroom flat to unwind, he thinks about how much brighter his life would be if he didn't have to hide in the shadows all the time. But Pluto feels scared, and Pluto feels ashamed, and Pluto isn't prepared to be condemned for the traits that he contains, and so he locks himself up as a mean of self-defense and tries to pretend that separation from the other planets is best. But the truth is, Pluto obsesses over how distant he feels from civilization. It hadn't always been like this. When Pluto was young, he had no trouble socializing, and the other planets weren't as patronizing. Back then, Pluto wasn't compared to anyone. Pluto wasn't constrained. Pluto didn't complain about the status he maintained but as the other planets grew up, Pluto stayed the same. They said he was still chained to his daydreams, that his head was up in space. They said he looked like a child among them, and he didn't have a place. They said he didn't belong with them as a planet anymore, so how could they now expect him to normally conform when he only gets ignored in the planetary society to which he was born, privately suffering the anxiety that they formed for him? The whole universe felt unexplored for him, because he could barely afford to open his front door. And so, Pluto moped around in his bare, lifeless apartment, left to his own devices. His days lacked brightness, until he heard a quiet knock from the hall. He hauled himself up from under the duvet, opened the door, and was overcome by her beauty. It was Venus. And Venus was simply returning some of his mail to his flat. But there was something warm about her that made his face pale. Yes, he didn't get that much sunlight. But it was more than that. It took about a minute's silence of staring for him to reply. But Venus liked this. She liked how his hair was casually careless, and she liked his polite shyness. As she handed him the mail, he stood smiling at the door, wondering how he'd never seen beauty like this before. Beauty like this before. And he guessed, although she only lived 7 planets down the hall, he never really left the house, so he never saw her more. But he wanted to. So he pushed through the nervousness because he knew that otherwise it wouldn't come through. But as the words came out his mouth, he thought they were dragging out, making the purposeless turbulence of his nerves merciless. And then he asked her out. Now, Pluto felt apprehensive. He didn't want to appear at all selfish or insensitive. And despite the possibilities and the outcomes being endless, this girl was special. This girl made him breathless, but Pluto felt restless because Venus was, well, hot. And the one inconvenience was that Pluto was not. And this was significant. He would never be as brilliant as her because although she lived just down the hall, they came from different worlds. He wanted her to admire him just as he admired her. But he thought that his awkward personality meant that this wouldn't occur. And he didn't want to overcomplicate things with unconfident compliments, but with this new astonishment, he couldn't help but lack self-confidence. You see, Pluto was consequently conscious about his height, and half hoped that she guessed he compensated elsewhere. And he thought his clothes and his hair and his eyes were in action to highlight the fact that he had a very small force of attraction. And what he didn't know was that during even their first interaction, Venus didn't care about any of this. She saw the meanness of the other planets, and she saw that they were wrong, and she was left speechless as she thought that maybe he'd been a planet all along. She wondered if this was why he'd always been so withdrawn, and she knew she'd be wrong if she didn't go on, and so she said yes. And after the clumsy first date, followed months more of talking about how lucky they both were that she had come knocking as if from beyond the stars. This bond had formed, and Pluto finally felt as though he belonged with this girl. She was one in a 50 sextillion. She was the one brilliance that would listen to his opinions. And although they often saw things in a different light, her decisions had enough wisdom to clear his sight. You see, her mere existence had the persistence to make him hopeful, to make him open his eyes and see that he had all this space around him, space for his own disposal. And he no longer felt like a total antisocial because everything he did was for her in that moment. Every thought, every emotion was for her. And down to Earth, Pluto was too small to be with the other planets. And down to Earth, Pluto had had no life. But when you put your head above the clouds and above the damage and the strife that the other planets made him manage, you realize that perhaps the problem present was the neglected idea of perspective. It didn't matter that the other planets were too selective to make Pluto feel accepted, because in the end he found someone to make him feel protected. You see, Pluto felt safe. And Pluto was amazed as he realized there'd always be someone to remind him how much he changed. He no longer let others tell him how to behave, because at the end of the day, we're all the same, and the danger that we feel like we have to face, it shouldn't make us deranged, it should make us better. And the biting, bitter people that make an effort to oppress should not be blessed for making others feel depressed. You see, Pluto did not expect to feel accepted, and was perplexed by the respect that Venus's perfection presented to him, because expressing neglect to himself had always been an obsession. Expressing neglect to himself had always been an addiction, a restrictive condition, evicting ambition that gave him permission to be a victim of the